We are live on Zoom. We are live on Zoom, and the meeting will begin after a brief announcement from our Spanish interpreter. Carlos, would you like to begin? Just a minute. Carlos, could you again? I think we did not have a speaker on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Please
Can
go
you hear
ahead.
me? Okay,
can
give
hear
me
you.
just a second. Let me find it now. Buenas noches y bienvenidos a nuestra reunión. Para quienes necesitan interpretación, este seminario ofrece traducción simultánea al español. Para acceder al canal en español en Zoom, sigan los siguientes pasos. Número 1, en la barra de herramientas de Zoom, hagan clic en el icono del globo etiquetado Interpretación. Número 2, seleccionen español de la lista de idiomas disponibles. Número 3, si prefieren no escuchar el audio original, pueden seleccionar silenciar audio original para una traducción más clara. Para los que asisten en persona y desean un auricular de interpretación, pueden dirigirse a Tracy, quien les ayudará a obtener uno. Gracias y esperamos que disfruten de la reunión. Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias. With that, we'll call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Hey, Vesta, you want to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Tradition.
Yeah.
Here it is. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vesta. All right, we're going to go to roll call. We'll do the River Mac first.
Pip Marquez de la Plata,
Here.
Mike Nichols,
Here.
Spencer Scott,
Here.
Betsy Van Dyke. Here. Cynthia Strecker. Here. Vicky Clues. Here. Lonnie Lazar.
Here.
Ty Hilton.
Here.
And I believe Joe Rogoff is absent, right? All right.
Now we'll move to the Kosmont.
All right. Scott Foster.
Here.
Scott Nevin is absent. Caroline Madden. Jill Lippett. Brian Lubitz. Jenny Nichols. And John Laughlin.
Here. All right, great, thank you. So then we'll go into approval of the agenda. The agenda's not long, so I hope you all read it now while you're here. So can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Can we do hands?
Yeah.
And can I get hands all in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay. Agenda is approved. Now's the time for anyone that's either on the River Mac or the Coast Mac to let us know if you have any conflict with items on the agenda tonight. No? Okay, we're gonna move right into the presentation. And we have Felicia and Joe.
And first, Linda.
Oh, Linda here? I didn't even see her.
Does that work at all? Yeah? Okay. Hello, everybody. Wonderful to be here tonight. I wanted to give a brief context about why we are discussing an enhanced infrastructure financing district, or EIFD. One of the challenges that I see in West County is that we have a lot of really old infrastructure that needs to be fixed before it breaks. And an example of that, my favorite one actually is Rio Nito, which has a culvert that literally says WPA, which dates back to the New Deal, and FDR was when the culvert was put in that really catastrophically failed over the winter, causing flooding in areas that had never previously experienced flooding, including in actually some houses down in that area. And so in addition to that, we've also had a lot of conversations about the need for enhanced recreational amenities, affordable housing, all of these, and also climate resilience efforts. All of these are things that could potentially be funded by an enhanced infrastructure financing district. While we are interested in these things in West County, the city of Sebastopol is also interested in these things. And so we have hired Kosmont Consulting to actually look at a few possibilities. One would be just the city of Sebastopol does its own thing. We could then potentially do a separate thing out in unincorporated Sonoma County, sort of separating the two, or we could look at something that is broader and more inclusive and actually combines incorporated areas and unincorporated areas. Now, a couple of really important things to note. Number one, this is not a new tax. So this is like redevelopment. It's a form of tax increment financing, which means that it takes property tax growth and it then reinvests it in the communities that are generating it, right? So that means that, every year, right, our property taxes go up, but it's capped in terms of the amount of dollars that it goes up, 1% per year. So a portion of that increase, but also a portion of the increase from new development, from projects that might have already been approved by the county. Like, for instance, there's a hotel project in the Lower Russian River, that's been approved, but has not been built yet. If you sort of set the baseline for the property tax, then that growth and that revenue can actually be captured and then reinvested in the community. And I just wanted to share that the reason that there is some information about Sebastopol in the slides is because Sebastopol has already had this meeting. And so we wanted to be transparent with you and kind of share some of the things that they're thinking about. I will say that Sebastopol is worried about rural West County stealing their money, and rural West County is worried about Sebastopol stealing their money. And I'm here to say that the goal actually is to improve everyone, and that before this, if this ever actually moved forward, which is going to take a vote of the Board of Supervisors, and if the city of Sebastopol wants to join, they would have to vote as a city as well. There would actually have to be a list of projects. We are so far from that. We still have a ways to go in this process, and we're really just trying to solicit some ideas today. But that list of projects, right, essentially guarantees that not all of the money is going to be funneled into one community. And really the goal for me, when I think about our small town downtowns, there are a lot of folks who live kind of just outside of the urban area that still call that town their home. And so when I think about, how you draw boundaries, I also think about, is there a way to capture that revenue, from just outside town? Because like I live outside of Sebastopol city limits, but that's still, where I can kind of bike and walk to. And similarly, I was on, septic and lived in Forestville, but not technically in the urban service area of Forestville. So also thinking about kind of how we define our communities and our community sheds. So we're really here tonight to listen, come up with your ideas, and then to eventually develop a project list. Again, we're not at the go or no go point, so we're very early. I never come to you all with a fully baked idea. I have learned that lesson. We need to start with you. We need to listen to you. And that is why we are here today. And with that, I would love to pass it over to Kosmont.
Thank you, Supervisor Hopkins. That was a great introduction, and it's really nice to see everybody of the River and Coast Max here, and glad that we could get such a nice large meeting. My name is Felicia Williams, and I'm a Senior Vice President at Kosmont Companies. I'm accompanied by my coworker, Joe Dieguez, who's also a Senior Vice President, and we head up the Infrastructure Financing Division of the company, which has been a very busy division because cities need and counties need to find ways to fund critical infrastructure. So if we could go to the presentation, do you have that there, or do I need to share my screen?
You'll share your screen.
Okay.
I'm happy to do that, Felicia, here.
Oh, because I can't share. There we are. Okay, so the next slide. Just a little bit of the agenda for tonight, and the biggest area of interest for us is to hear from you and the public on what types of public infrastructure, so streets, roads, affordable housing, flood prevention, resiliency and sustainability that Supervisor Hopkins mentioned. We want to hear from you as to what you think the priority should be for your regions. So we'll go through a little bit of background of why we're here, look at the special district study that we are conducting, and also just some background on special financing districts. Again, it's not a new tax, but we'll give some of the historical background on it, and then get to the meat of the discussion, which is community input. So next slide. So Sebastopol and Sonoma County are engaging in a special district study that Kosmont is leading. And District 5 Supervisor Hopkins and the city of Sebastopol are looking at a special district to invest in improvements that benefit both the city and the county residents. The initial estimates for an EIFD is what it's called, the special district, were about 125 million that was provided by the county based on just initial results. And so we are here to actually put more investment behind that projection and come up with more accurate numbers. So just a little bit about special district tax increment financing. As Supervisor Hopkins mentioned, this is something that used to be called redevelopment, which was eliminated in 2012. But way back when, about 70 years ago, the voters approved this type of financing, which takes a portion of future property taxes from new development. So no new taxes are being proposed, and it takes those and invests it in public infrastructure. And this allows local governments to create districts that enable tax increment financing to be used. And the type of district is called an enhanced infrastructure financing district now. And what we've shown just a little bit of a graphic at the bottom that shows really this is an area where the private sector invests in new development. The incremental property taxes that go to the county and the city that are participating in the EIFD go into a special fund. They're held in a bank, and then they are used to pay for public infrastructure. And what we want to hear from you tonight is the types of public infrastructure that you would like to see funded. So next slide. And there are quite a few of these districts in progress as cities lost redevelopment. And so you can see here, we just wanted to give just a picture of where in the state these districts are being looked at. There's some quite near you in sort of Northern California, Santa Rosa, Sonoma County, different areas, and then quite a few in Southern California as well. Next slide. And these are the types of projects that EIFDs can fund. And this is really in the legislature. We tried to put it into categories. So as you start to think about infrastructure that the unincorporated areas of the county need, water, sewer, storm and flood, roadways, public transit, open space, children's facilities, libraries, and that would also include a pool, affordable housing. Broadband is a new one because the state is trying to increase everyone's access to broadband. And then also some small business and nonprofit facilities or facilities that support those. And wildfire prevention and mitigation. So those are some of the general ideas. We wanted to give some pictures. And then the next slide is where we have come up with an initial list based on feedback from the county, from city staff, on some types of improvements that the public may want to see and that the elected officials and staff are also interested in. So we'll go to the next slide and look at next steps, and then we'll come back to this side and keep it here so that we can continue the discussion. But the next slide, which is the last one. And the next steps, once again, we have gone to the city council in Sebastopol, and we got some feedback from them on some of the improvements that they would like to see, and feedback in general on the special district. We're going to do some additional outreach with the city and county for the next couple of months. And then we are hoping to go to the city council and the board of supervisors at the end of the year or the beginning of the year to see if there is a desire to form a special district and then begin the formation process, which is quite a few public hearings and public meetings next year in 2025. So that's it for the presentation. Maybe if we can go back to the last slide and keep it there, and then we're happy, Joe and I are happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you guys so much. We'll first go to the both MAC councils for any questions or comments. I got one too.
Okay, so I'm not seeing road improvement on that list. And it should be.
Let me ask a question fast. None of you. Can you hear online if we're not up next to the owl?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So the question was about roads were not on the list. Did that just not come up before?
And that's also why we're here, is we can add that to the list. So what types of road improvements?
Oh my
And we have
God.
sidewalks and bicycle improvements. We had multimodal on here, but roads specifically, what would you like us to add?
Roads that you can drive on.
They're ruining your car.
Yeah, that's really sorry.
Okay, so paving, resurfacing.
Paving, resurfacing, drainage, culvert issues.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so add that to the list.
Betsy?
I have a question. I have a basic question. So, Linda mentioned, and you mentioned that Sebastopol can't take all the money and we can't take all the money. Is the county able, in times of budget crisis or deficit, able to, or is that money locked in? The increased property tax revenue?
So, and that's a really good question. So with the county and the city contributing money, they will form a separate board to oversee the EIFD that will consist of city and county members, so that both of them have the ability to make decisions for both the city and the county. So that's the checks and balances that helps prevent one entity from taking more money than the other. The second part is that when the district is formed, each entity will commit a certain amount. So we'll commit 40% of our property tax increment, we'll commit 50% of our property tax increment, and that's what guides the investment going forward, so that the rest of it can flow into the county general fund for other services. Now, if there should be a change in the future to that, then you would have to go and amend the plan that allows for the tax increment, and you would have to go through the public hearing process over again. So hopefully what the city and county will do is they will do a fiscal impact analysis that says, this is the right percentage that we want to put in here, so that we can plan for future budgets, make sure we have enough cushion, and then we have a positive fiscal impact of the EIFD and the improvements.
Yeah, and then perhaps I can add, thank you for the question as well. To add some additional color, we're finding for many of these, the 28 or so that have been formed so far in cities and counties across the state, there's a bit of a sweet spot, typically somewhere between 20% and 50% of an agency's future share of the property tax within the boundary. Again, no portion of the existing property tax revenue, but just typically 25 to 50% of future property tax increment within the boundary being committed, with the remaining 50 to 75% flowing to the general fund of each agency. Now, to take the question to a further extreme, because I think it gets at the root of the question, let's say you form it, you commit some percentage, and then some fiscal emergency arises. Are those dollars truly locked in? The answer depends on where the district is at. If the financing district has issued bonds and encumbered a certain level of revenues to pay debt service on those bonds, those dollars truly are locked in. They are untouchable, so to speak, from a city or county general fund. However, if a district has been formed and perhaps there is no issuance of debt, there is no documented encumbrance of the funds into some sort of financial agreement, those dollars could be accessed via an amendment process that Felicia just outlined, and could be made available to the city and or county in such a an emergency scenario.
I want to add. One thing that I want to add, and actually I have a question for Felicia and Joe, because I don't have the answer to this, is that even if the county couldn't sort of, you know, rob the EIFD to sort, is it possible that they essentially move other funds that they were previously using also for that purpose, right? And use the EIFD funds for things that they would otherwise, you know, be paying for. And actually the example that I was thinking of was roads, right? Because the county sort of allocates a certain amount of general fund dollars toward roads. If we then form an EIFD and roads are one of those pieces, does the county have a requirement? And this is my question for Joe and Felicia, for a maintenance of effort. Because when we have put sales tax forward before the voters, like the regional parks measure, we actually had a maintenance of effort clause that means that we can't just go and ask the sales tax and then take away all the money from regional parks and suddenly you're paying for the same services, not additive services. And so I just want to check in on maintenance of effort, or if that's kind of a potential internal policy that the county could adopt. Because that would be my concern with something like roads. We're like, hey, we're going to get more roads paved. And the county's like, oh no, we're just going to take that general fund, fund it somewhere else, and you're going to have the same roads, but you know, an EIFD that was supposed to make things better and don't. So, Joe or Felicia?
Sure, thank you, Supervisor. So I can start, and then Felicia, please correct me or add to it. So there's technically no maintenance of effort clause in the EIFD jurisdiction, but there is specific guidance on improvements being new that are being funded, either new or, let's say, you know, roadways being extended, water mains being upsized, you know, the seasonal crossing being actually improved to be a permanent bridge. EIFDs are not meant to say we're already, you know, doing these slurry seals and repaving of existing roads. EIFD is just going to take that over, same level, and general fund dollars are going to go elsewhere. That would not be consistent with EIFD statute being focused on brand new or improvements to existing versus maintenance of existing. Does that actually answer the question or no?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Okay.
If I could ask, it's sort of related. I have two questions. One is, I know you said you're gonna look at that $125 million estimate that you had in the document up front. What geography does that cover? Is that Sebastopol? Is that Sebastopol plus Warfield plus, I mean, what part of unincorporated plus the city of Sebastopol does that cover, or is that just Sebastopol? That's my first question.
Go for it, Joe. It's actually a county analysis, and we've been hired to update it.
Yeah,
but
exactly right. So, no, yeah, thank you for the question. So, in the preliminary analysis prepared by the County Auditor Controller's Office, which was totally preliminary, just getting the ball rolling, general order of magnitude, what was assumed was the entirety of the city limit in the city of Sebastopol and the entirety of unincorporated 5th district of the county under a pretty wide range of scenarios. Are these 30-year districts? Are they 45-year district? What's the percentage growth assumed in assessed value? Is it 2%, 3%, 5% over time? So there was really a massive range, and the 125 million number is, I'm going to just say order of magnitude, maybe like a 40% of the total amount available. That's Kosmont saying of this wide range, you know, maybe let's assume a 3% growth and a 45-year district, us sort of choosing one example within this wide range. But to get at your question, just because we have the benefit of having spent the last few weeks diving deeper into the analysis, what we are arriving at is a potentially more focused boundary within both the incorporated jurisdiction and the unincorporated jurisdiction, just as a suggestion, as an alternative proposed by Kosmont to be considered by the elected official bodies. What that is looking like is a corridor-based potential boundary alternative within the city of Sebastopol that follows where the proposed development projects, where planning staff are actually seeing the proposed projects, essentially trying to focus on the areas where there will be a higher ratio of new development value compared to just what's there today, and to leave what's there today and the growth of that to the general funds of the city and the county. So far within the county, we're even earlier than that in the process. We've just identified some of these projects that the supervisor alluded to, potential hospitality improvements along the Russian River, some other specific, even hardware store improvements, RV park improvements throughout unincorporated county, to see if what those specific projects can get to us in terms of funding capacity. But that is just very preliminary analysis, just to give you a flavor of where we see some of the boundary alternatives going.
Okay, and thank you for that. My second question is, now, if this didn't happen, that money would come to the county anyway, right? And so, and maybe this is more of a question for Supervisor Hopkins, why would 4 other supervisors want to give up that money that they have some say into, to like say, okay, Supervisor Hopkins, your district is going to get this money in and of it by itself?
That is a great question, and I think the answer is twofold. One, from kind of just more the political lens. There are multiple supervisors, in fact, a majority of the board, interested in forming EIFDs in their own districts. So, right, are we all going to support this? Generally, the county actually did adopt a policy in support of kind of guiding EIFD conversations with cities. So the city of Santa Rosa, downtown EIFD is the furthest along. That's actually already at the point where the board will be voting on what is the dollar amount that we are committing to it. And then East County is a little bit behind us in exploring an East County EIFD. And there has also been interest expressed in the 4th district, also as a potential solution for the Asty Bridge. James is currently kind of brainstorming how it's going to fund the, making that permanent. The second answer is that, it has to pencil. And so the idea is that the EIFD actually does add value and bring in additional revenue through its existence. That by making these improvements, you are actually enhancing property values, which in the end, right? So you actually come out either neutral or hopefully positive from these investments.
Okay.
And so it's a little bit more obvious and clear cut, like in a downtown where you're like, okay, we're going to do things that are going to support the development of, say, a large housing complex by putting in sidewalks, something like that, and supporting that development. But I would also argue that in looking at climate impact, there's a benefit to property values if we can all still live here and have homeowners insurance in West County, for instance. And so that's also a compelling argument.
Okay. Just you had your hand up a while.
Two items. John Laughlin from Bodega Bay. One is maybe far down the stream, I understand, but what are the criteria that will be used to make decisions relative to which projects are funded or not funded? And I understand there's a board that gets constituted, but I mean, I guess I'm just curious, in other instances, obviously you've got a large number of EDIs throughout the state. How are they making decisions relative to the allocation of funds? What are the criteria?
Thank you. I can start on this one. Thank you. So I'd say the top 2 criteria we see are catalytic impact and public benefit. And it varies highly from community to community, special district to special district. What we often see prioritized by the elected officials is what's going to unlock something that wouldn't otherwise happen on its own, or happen as fast, or happen as intensely. So sometimes it's roadway, sometimes it's basic water and sewer, sometimes it's first mile, last mile transportation infrastructure that will get people to actually use a transit station and therefore catalyze transit-oriented development. So one lens, one criterion that we see often used is just how catalytic is this particular project. But that's not the full picture. There are some communities that are strategic in forming these, where part of the vision, part of the strategy is to take take advantage of investment happening in one area and actually spread the benefit in other areas. And an important point that we should make is when we define these boundaries, we're really just trying to focus where the value, where the dollars are going to come from, but we're actually not limiting where the dollars are going to be invested. Said a different way, these financing districts have the ability to spend dollars outside of their district boundary. Back to the question, sometimes what we see done is it's just, affordable housing is a priority. Affordable housing doesn't generate property tax in a lot of instances. Sometimes it's hard to define a purely fiscal return on investment. But more indirectly, we're often seeing a high degree of emphasis placed by many communities on affordable housing because of the public good, just because it allows employees of businesses within communities to actually live near where they work. There was a high public good criterion sort of ranking that will get those projects funded early. So it's not completely scientific. Sometimes it is this blend of art and science, but the top two that we see most often are catalytic impact and just how much public benefit is being provided.
Bill, that's super helpful. As I said, I had 2 points. One was a better understanding of the criteria. That's very useful. The second is representing Bodega Bay. There are 2 projects that are, I think, of interest in our community, and they would likely fall under this notion of nonprofit and small business. One is an investment, but quite specifically an investment in the Bodega Bay Grange, which serves as a certified Red Cross center, and it is used. The renovation is principally ultimately to ensure emergency capabilities. A commercial kitchen, independent power generation, potentially distribution of supplies and things of that nature. It's been used before in that regard. Is that the kind of project? It does not generate a defined economic return, but I'm curious that would fall under public benefit relative to criteria. Is that an example of something that would be a public benefit? I'm not asking you to judge it. I'm just asking what criteria it might fall under.
Is the Grange privately owned?
No, it's a community volunteer organization.
Okay,
But
it's a nonprofit.
I don't know the legal structure.
Okay, so it's a nonprofit?
Yes, I believe it's considered a nonprofit, yes. I'm just curious, is that the kind of project that would fall under one of these 2 criteria? Is it a project that might be appropriate for the EDIF treatment?
Yeah, so Felicia, interested in your thoughts as well. So short answer is yes. We've seen that sort of thing evaluated and put on the list in at least one other of these financing districts in Southern California, in Los Angeles County. The description in that scenario was a little bit of a emergency operations center, climate resilience center. Its emphasis in that scenario was a facility that can provide both information and supplies with emphasis on times of emergency. And so it was deemed as a public good and made the list in that respect. In that scenario, just to share more context, it was additionally proposed to be used as just a community gathering space in times not of emergency, and that just added to its perceived public good. So that's the longer answer. Again, this is art and scientific. It's a little bit of policy decision beyond what the EIFD law says, but it seems to be a yes.
Helpful context of how these things, what would fall appropriately within the bounds, what would likely not. So I would certainly advocate that that be added to the list, whether it falls under the category of a nonprofit or it's listed independently. But that's a real need. It's been one that's been expressed for a considerable period of time. The second is replacement of the ice house. My understanding is that ice for the packing of fresh falls of fish in Bodega now is the only ice facility between San Francisco and Mendocino. That may not be accurate, but this is what I've been told. It's always being reported as chronically out of service and beyond the end of its useful life. This is an issue to keep people employed. essentially. So it is, I suppose, in that sense, an economic generator, because in its absence, the economy would contract. So is that the kind of project also that would typically be considered in a program like this?
I can start with this. So the Felicia is asking about public-private ownership because these do tend to be districts focused on publicly owned assets. They don't have to be. There's a category that Felicia covered, which is facilities utilized by small businesses and
Right.
nonprofits. And there's a definition in the statute about what means small business. Is it revenues? Is it number of employees? So there is a definition that would be legally applicable for, does the facility qualify under the small business use or not? So that would be a question to be applied to this specific project.
And just to clarify, it actually is owned and operated by Sonoma County Regional Parks.
Excellent.
Well, thank you. Thanks. I wasn't sure. That's great. Thank you. You've answered both questions. And in that regard, then I would ask that both be added to the list of either specifically or under an appropriate category, which sounds like small business or / nonprofit.
Yeah, and there's
I'll
also
add both of them to the list.
you in the audience who can probably provide more information during public comment.
Okay. Mike,
Thank you. Felicia, Joe, first off, I want to congratulate you both, because I was on a statewide broadband call this afternoon, and you came with very high recommendations from the folks in Southern California who you've worked with for some time. I also feel that broadband is important here in Sonoma County. With the state budget cuts this year, we had over 90 miles of middle mile corridors cut from Sonoma County, from on Highway 1 up to the county line of Mendocino, and also from Santa Rosa down into the Sonoma Valley on Highway 12. So all of that mileage was cut. I'd like to see broadband certainly be considered as a category for infrastructure project list. The second point that I had is that we're looking at $125 million potentially between the city and the unincorporated area of District 5. What would the split be if we split off city dollar-wise and the county dollar-wise? Do we have any idea what that number would be?
Thank you. In that one number, which again, just restating, it was in a wide range of scenarios. In that 125 number, 25 was from within the city boundary and 100 was from outside the city boundary with an unincorporated county jurisdiction. There are so many possibilities for how that split ends up looking. At some point, perceivably, the county could just decide it's only going to be a partner to the city within the boundary and not do anything in unincorporated jurisdiction. It's obviously an extreme scenario. And the other could be this district does not get formed at all within the city, and all the funding capacity is generated from unincorporated county. Just to build further on that point, what we often see is the law allows us to break one financing district into multiple project areas so that revenues can be tracked independently. Dollars generated within the city, dollars generated within the county. But the law does allow for flexibility. If there's agreement by both the city and the county that certain projects within the city limits are a priority and serve both city residents and county residents, there's nothing stopping the county from saying, we want to use some of our dollars from generated outside the city for projects within the city. Those are really policy-based decisions, not as much legally constrained. Just a quantitative thing we're finding when we're doing our analysis, when we look at development projects proposed, the things that are going to bring big chunks of new assessed value growth, we just happen to see those more within the city limit than in unincorporated county jurisdiction. It is typically what we see: new hotel development, new residential development. We do see potentially the bigger jumps coming from within the city. That's not to say that if the county went big in unincorporated jurisdiction, they couldn't generate that larger share of dollars. Our point quantitatively is just sometimes it's hard to justify the high fiscal return on investment with a huge boundary in unincorporated jurisdiction versus a focused boundary.
And I think I would add to that, it may be helpful to talk a little bit about the approval process. Once the committee is formed, it's called the Public Financing Authority, and it will be a mixture of city and county individuals. That's where you will see these policy decisions made. And they are embodied in a document called the Infrastructure Financing Plan. And they'll have 4 public meetings to review this plan with the public. And so that's where all of that would be vetted out. So it is a very public process that would have public input, and that's where those policy decisions would come up.
That's a silly question. Maybe it's not silly, but when you say city and county people, do you mean people that are already part of government, or are these other people?
So they would be a mixture of city and county elected officials and then public members that they appoint.
Okay.
So if anyone's interested.
Hello, I'm Scott Foster, Timber Cove representative up the coast. A couple of things. Affordable housing on there, I just want to underline, that's an economic constraint on our community. It's the biggest issue we have out there with respect to keeping businesses going and making more opportunities. There's no possibility for growth out there without affordable housing. So that would be a catalytic event. The other thing that I'd like to see on the list is electric vehicle charging areas. Right now, there's nothing between Fort Bragg and Bodega Bay. And people with electric vehicles like to go to the beach, they like to go to the parks, they like to go camping. There aren't electric vehicle chargers in the campgrounds or anywhere. Businesses are concerned about this, and turned us down because of they don't want people there in the middle of the night making a big mess, which is what people do if there aren't porta potties. This isn't like in town, so that's an infrastructure investment that is only going to. I know the county and state are looking at going to electric vehicles. It would be nice if that could be accommodated for the community up there and as a boost to the economy, frankly.
And thank you. You're talking to 2 electric vehicle drivers on this call. So, and I'm assuming those would be sort of the fast chargers.
Yeah.
Which are usually the more expensive ones, which would require investment. So we'll add that to the list. Thank you. And EV chargers are economic development. And that's something to work on with the businesses that, you know, the more people you have coming to visit to charge their EVs, studies show they spend about $1 per extra minute in an area when they shop. So.
Well, here's the point on that exactly. One of the sites we're considering is across from the Fort Ross store. Right now, they're right on Highway 1. They have 2 outhouses, 2 porta potties that they get slammed in the summer. And when after hours, when they're locked up, that doesn't stop people from making a mess. So they love the idea of the chargers being across the road. But right now, any more people, as much as they like the business, they can't accommodate the septic. So, and I think that that's going to be, especially in the coast road, this isn't in town where, you know, you're running the grocery store from. This is 2-hour drive up the coast. And you're probably going to want to stop at some point. So that's, you know, that's a real consideration in rural areas. And that is all I have to add. Thank you.
Ty? You have to go next time.
Yeah, thanks. My question is, where does this district live? Like staffing wise, would we create a new entity that would then house this? Somebody has to do the staff work around this. Where does it go into an existing county or city agency and the board then lives in there? This might be a silly question, I don't know if this is making sense. So I'm wondering where does it do that? And then since I have my time, I'd like to underline affordable housing as one of the proposals again. And then another question, and you may have answered this before, Felicia, around governance and when do you make those decisions on how many seats somebody might get from the city of Sebastopol as opposed to the county unincorporated areas? These are silly questions.
A good question. So I could go ahead and answer that. I'll probably answer them both at the same time. But the Public Financing Authority is created when a resolution of intent to form the district is passed by the city and the county. And depending, one taxing entity has to initiate that formation. And in this case, since the city of Sebastopol has hired us to do the analysis, it will likely be the city of Sebastopol that is the lead taxing agency. With that, there will be 5 board members on the PFA, and there would be 3 from the city of Sebastopol, that's 2 elected officials and 1 public member, and then 2 from the county, which would be an elected official and a public member that they appoint. So once the entity is formed, then at the next meeting, they would go ahead and do like a MATI Act to say that the positions are open so that people know from the public to apply, and then they would be appointed at a next council or county board meeting. The staff, since it would be the city initiating the EIFD, the staff would be the city staff.
I'll just add, yeah.
Can I ask you, I'm sorry, a question on what you just said. I think you said right now, and I know this is all preliminary, but there'd be 4 people successful. 3, and then
3
2
and 2,
from
yes.
3 from, and then 2 from unincorporated. Now, if I go back to your original, when you're talking about how much money could potentially come from each of these places, just round and around, you had 25 million from the city of Sebastopol and the remaining 100 from unincorporated. So how do you reconcile that balance of people on this in this organization, given the disparity between those 2 numbers?
Yeah, that's the minimum requirement. This 5-member board is the minimum requirement. Most of the time we keep it to the 5 just as a matter of ease of administration, but you could have 7, 9, 11, and you could have even representation if you wanted, or even more so technically by the county than the city. Legally, there's a lot of flexibility. There's a minimum of 5 where the majority of whatever number you decide on are either city council members or county supervisors. And in any case, at least 2 public members, but there could be more than 2 public members. You're seeing this play out in Santa Rosa with the proposed Santa Rosa EIFD, where I believe we have 3 public members and I think 2 and 2 from the city and county there. It's just been our experience that the larger you get, just as a matter of practice, it's just hard to schedule meetings and sometimes have people show up and have quorum and get things done. But to arrive at the number, we take into account what you just said. How many dollars are being allocated by each agency? That's one measure. It could also come down to who is willing to put more time into staffing this thing. We do find that cities tend to be the lead in these multiple agency EIFDs. The best examples, quite honestly, that we've worked on in like Orange County and the city of Placentia, you've got a working group team that includes folks from both. And just to let folks know, I mean, that's how it's been going so far on this assignment. We've got members from city staff, planning and administration, and we've got county administration staff on our monthly calls. And that happens to work quite well. But if we're talking about who's going to sign a staff report, it helps to choose a lead, and it helps if you have one that's in a city, you know, would be like a city manager or city finance director or city community development director being the signature on documents. Sorry to go long-winded, but you know, these things do tend to be this blend of art and science.
And just one thing that I want to add, is that I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion that Sebastopol would necessarily be the lead agency. That would be a conversation that we would have with them. And I will say that, you know, when compared especially to something like the city of Santa Rosa, right? Sebastopol has much more limited resources and limited staffing, and it actually even took some sort of arm twisting, and it's actually county funding that provided the funding to hire Kosmont. You know, but in terms of like, you know, city of Sebastopol was very interested, but they're like, we don't even know if we have staffing to support, you know, this effort moving forward. So I think it's definitely an open-ended conversation, as is the composition. And quite frankly, I would never agree to something that was, you know, weighted heavily towards a jurisdiction in either direction that is providing, you know, a minority of the funding. You know, if it ended up being equal, I actually wouldn't mind having an even number of members. That means that you actually have to have a consensus or you're deadlocked, right? And so, you know, even though that can be a challenging thing to deal with, it also actually sets, I think, a good bar to go towards. So all of that's under discussion. And I just want to be clear that like, there's no kind of pre-manufactured solution that we're moving forward with.
I want to thank you for that comment, Supervisor. I think that's very helpful, but nonetheless, this is the first meeting you're having with us, to Joe and Felicia. And when the question was asked, the answer was 3 and 2. It wasn't, it's to be determined. Typically the minimum is 5. And so if there's the perception right out of the gate that the control rests with one place or another, I think that does a disservice to the whole process. And I would certainly hope this isn't being promulgated as the supervisor suggests it shouldn't be, as some decision about membership.
Yeah.
And I apologize for that. That's, as Joe mentioned, that's the minimum in the state statute.
Thank you.
And appreciate the constructive criticism, by the way. We've got a scope of work, and governance is like a task 3 that we haven't even started yet. So we're doing our best, but you're in at the right level. We're talking to you at a good point in our process. So absolutely, sorry, no conclusions have been made. Sorry to construe otherwise.
And unsurprisingly, West County is always ahead of the curve in trying to jump to the conclusion before we've gotten the groundwork. You guys are always ahead. I mean this in a good way.
And the reason I brought this up, I talked to a couple of people that were on redevelopment a long time ago up here, and they said one of the problems with that particular entity was that it did pit one community versus another. And I think all of us out here would want something that everyone sees as equitable and fair based on some set of criteria that people agree on. So if we go ahead or not go ahead, that you don't start off with that. I don't have anything to do with it because you're going to put someone. I just think that's really high.
Can the public start in, join us?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Just a quick question. I think to be like strategic about deciding how we're spending this money, I kind of wanted to piggyback on a question that was asked, but I don't think it was fully answered. And the question is, okay, we're generating more money. It would be nice to know, like, where would that money go if we didn't form this district? And what are the benefits? And it seems like potentially the benefits I'm hearing is that you can pull money across district lines and spend money in a collective way, and that you might be able to get money faster. I'm curious if there are other benefits. And just, I would assume, you know, if the county is getting more revenue from increased property taxes, our services would get better. And so that's my question, is like, does it get lost in an already set budget process? And then this is an opportunity to basically preempt that and put it towards something and avoid a lot of politics.
What you said, and that last part is how I would answer it, is that, you know, I mean, we have the county, like otherwise this will be going into the county's general fund. And if we pulled into 100 different directions, whatever sort of the political priority and the institutional priority is at the time. But what I see the benefit in this is that you actually do end up with more local control, because you would actually have publicly appointed members, you know, who live in these communities, and potentially if it's a partnership with the city, right, folks coming together to make those common decisions. And, you know, and the goal again is not to totally screw over the county's general fund. We want to make investments that actually improve property values over time and, you know, do end up keeping the county's general fund whole, but while also making West County a better place to live. And I would also say that, you know, some of those benefits can be really challenging to fund. Like we have looked for 100 different ways of funding the Ice House, for instance, and we currently have a federal funding request in. Regional Parks is currently working on some applications for charging EV stations in Walla. And so, we're always trying to find money, but this would kind of give you that guaranteed funding. The other thing that I think would be exciting that we haven't really discussed is opportunity for matching, right? It doesn't mean that those grants necessarily go away. A lot of times those grants actually have a local match. And insofar as we could use this fund to draw in state or federal dollars, then we'll actually amplify the impacts of our investment as well.
Okay.
I just wanted to say the three things I think I would support that would hopefully benefit everyone economically. Wildfire prevention. I think air quality affects tourism, agriculture, everyone's health, affordable housing, and protected bike lanes.
All right, Betsy.
Is any of them, say we've got this hypothetical 1.25 or 125 million, is any of that set aside for administration? Their administrative overhead worked into that?
Yes. Short answer is yes. There varies completely by district, but yes, typically a small percentage is set aside for administration.
All right, any more council comments or questions?
And really quickly, the comment before, the last item was protected bike lanes. Was that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm assuming we can feed more stuff in that we think. Sonoma County, yeah. All right, let's go.
Just a quick clarification. Is this 125 million per year, or is this over time a total?
That preliminary estimate, again, just a preliminary estimate, was a present value. It's not an annual amount. It's sort of a total over a potentially 45-year district lifetime, but just discounted to account for inflation. So what that whole revenue stream is worth over the whole district lifetime represents about 125 million in today's dollars.
Go ahead. We're gonna move to public now. Sorry, there's two times as many council people this time.
I did a prepared thing. It's written, so a lot of it's been talked about. But I think I need to just be sort of said. My name is Scott Farmer. I reside in the Salt Point area of North Sonoma Coast, Timber Cove. I listened to the Sebastopol City Council meeting on the 3rd of September on this subject, and I am alarmed. On our North Coast experience is that county resources come hard and infrequently to the North Coast.
Could you bring the microphone closer to your mouth? Thank you.
Our North Coast experience is that county resources come hard and infrequently to the North Coast. An example is the recent county application for federal funds for fast EV charging infrastructure. The sites to cover the coast include Guerneville, Occidental, and Bodega Bay. That's great. Nothing north of Bodega Bay. There are efforts now to try to fill that in. We are left to seek out separate funding, having been left out of the county's vision of the coast. The North Coast generates a large percentage of the county's tourist occupancy tax, TOT, of which very little finds its way back to whence it came. To carve out general county tax revenue to solely benefit development seemingly in city and commercial areas of West County is troublesome. Bonds will encumber property owners for 45 years, and where these funds are invested will be with an urban bias. The city of Sebastopol will in effect have a veto say on which projects are funded, or so says the Sebastopol mayor. Here's an idea, just to think as a comparison. Let's pass a law stating that all TOT revenues shall be returned to the local communities from whence the taxes are collected to fund projects and programs that those local communities deem important to their communities, all of it. This is how it feels. Good governance requires good intention. While listening to the Sebastopol City Council dream up a creative wish list of how we spend the project.
Your time's up.
Can I finish my sentence?
Yeah, finish your sentence.
To The housing projected $100 million from a county tax transfer, the northwest and north county coast of Sonoma County is out of mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions.
Do you wanna come up?
Well, I'm kind of loud. Do you want me to talk up there?
As long as it works, I don't care.
Yeah, I think so the interpreter can
Okay,
hear
that's
you.
fine. It's fine. I can do it. It's kind of loud. I know. I'm known for it. And my questions, there are a couple of things that came up from the council that are specific to the coast as well as the Lower River area. One is the public restrooms issue, and I don't know if that comes under brownfield rehab. I don't know what brownfield is, but we all need more restrooms. There's no question that we need more restrooms. So I would like to prioritize that pretty high. And another one is the concept of affordable housing, which is also workforce housing. One of the things that happens up in the North Coast specifically is that it has a very aging population. And even along the coast, it's a higher age of the average number of people who are there, who need people to take care of them, not just during the tourist season. And there needs to be school support, because those people will come and work summer jobs out on the river and up on the coast and then leave because they don't have the infrastructure they need in order to stay. So workforce housing to help support the people who stay year round and population year round, and then also the school. So I don't know where that fits into this. The community gathering spaces, we don't really have them, which is one of the reasons we keep using schools and churches and whatever it is we want. But what you say, like the Grange, is not only a community gathering space, but it's also for emergencies. We don't have them out here. And so we need more of them. And then is the sidewalk and bicycle improvements, is it existing ones or is it possibly new ones as well? So those are the things that I feel is the most important thing on my list.
We may have lost.
And-
Roger.
Well, yeah, right.
I think they're still online, right? You just.
They are, we just can't see
We
them.
just can't see them right now,
Yeah.
but they're still in.
They'll be back.
Anyone else here? Gene?
Yeah, I just have, Gene from Rio Negro, California, and I have just a couple quick questions. One is, when do we need to have our projects outlined and presented for the funding? Second one, what is the timing for the formation of the EIFD? When do we anticipate this will be solidified and formed for this district? And what is the calendar arrangement where we anticipate the funding will be distributed? Is it an annual thing or semi-annual distribution? So I just have those three questions out.
Did you hear that?
Yes, yes.
I
Yes.
can't see.
No,
Yes.
yes.
I believe they'll be answering questions all together.
I think we should go one by one. We've done that before and it doesn't tend to work.
Should I bring it
'Cause
back in?
yeah, because it gets. We miss people's stuff and I don't want to miss anyone's stuff on this.
You're gonna wait till he's done with his.
Are you done, Gene?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like us to go ahead with some of the
Yeah.
responses? You got it. So, wasn't really a question, but just wanted to make it clear, if there's a perception that the dollars will be used to serve new development, I just wanted to repeat a very important point that is not obvious, that if we're drawing boundaries around new development, it's not that the dollars will be used just to benefit those new developments. It's just that's where the value is going to be created, and it can be for the benefit of entirely different areas. We're not required to spend the dollars within the boundaries that we draw. There's potentially a perception that property owners are locked into something different than they would be if the district were not formed. And so because this is not a new tax, from a property owner's perspective, nothing at all changes financially, whether you're in an EIFD or not. Your tax bill looks exactly the same. What is going on is a bit behind the scenes, a bit of an accounting exercise in nature, where there's a reappropriation of the dollars that come from that future property tax revenue stream, is prioritizing the infrastructure in a more locally controlled way. Heard the need for more restrooms. I've never heard that called brownfield improvements, but we're going to use that one. Thank you. Community gathering space. Heard
No, it's
the,
called.
the question on sidewalk bicycle improvements. It really is for new ones. If we're just maintaining existing improvements as it relates to sidewalks for bicycles, that's really not the intent of the law. We'd say that's likely not eligible, but the intent is for new facilities, sidewalks, bicycle, or otherwise. To Gene's most recent questions, when the projects need to be outlined for funding, in a way it starts now. We want to start as inclusive as possible. So that's why this sort of feedback is really important. When the list becomes somewhat more final is when this document gets prepared called the Infrastructure Financing Plan. That's the document that gets approved by the City Council, County Board of Supervisors, this new Public Financing Authority Board. That's really when you want to have a list in really good shape. And that is what we're calendaring for, when it's not even on our scope of work, but what could be calendared for the spring of 2025 when that plan gets a bit more solidified. And there's an asterisk on that. These documents, these infrastructure financing plans, can actually be amended over time. It's hard to know everything that's going to happen over a 50-year district lifetime. And so the statute allows for these plans to be revisited. It's actually required to be revisited at least once annually, so that if there are revisions that need to be made, they can be made in that format. So timing for the actual forming, it goes along those same points. Again, it's not even a part of our scope of work. We're in the feasibility analysis phase. That's all that's been funded. But if it were to move forward, we could imagine it being formed. This financing district could be formed within the first half of calendar year 2025, call it late spring or so. And then the actual distributions is annual. The way this works is, property tax bills go out typically twice a year. Those property tax bills get paid, and then dollars get dispersed by county auditor controller twice a year or once a year. The better practice for EIFDs across the state, these are nuanced mechanisms. The distributions typically only happen once a year. We've discussed that preliminarily with this county's auditor controller. We would imagine once a year disbursements into the EIFD fund. That doesn't mean that the expenditures from the EIFD fund would only happen annually. It would be a little bit like, accessing any organizations or public agencies funding. The allocation could be made multiple times throughout the year. If there's ever an issuance of debt, like with bonds, those would bring in bigger chunks of funding, so to speak. But the district would receive revenues annually throughout its district lifetime.
Okay,
Thank you, Lucy Hardcastle from Forestville. One of the things I'd like to have added to this, what seems to me a very tiny pool of money over time, is parking. I see in downtown Forestville that parking spaces come at a premium, and tourism is impacted. Our local restaurants are impacted when people can't find a public parking space. So I'd like that added too. And in terms of bicycle infrastructure, there's a bike-friendly Forestville group, and what they're trying to do is figure out connecting the already existing pathways and find safe pathways for families or tourists from one bike path to get to another. So there are some segments that could be improved or developed to where it could be a great bicycle path, which connects, way more towns, etc. So those two, but I don't know if we're talking about $125 million. And if anything needs permitting, then that's going to need half of that money is going to go to the permit department for studies. So, it just feels as though we're talking a pittance, but I like the direction that it's going. Thank you.
Good evening, Jennifer Butler with Grayton Community Services District.
And I find the idea very appealing, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. I do have some reservations in just that the irony of increasing property values does tend to increase tax. And for me, taxes are so significant that that is an oxymoron on affordable housing. So I realize that we're not talking about a tax increase, but I'm going to say it here today so that in 5 years from now, we're on the same straight path that nothing has changed. I am in favor of more bathrooms and community spaces. And I have two questions. One is, how would this board interact with the established governance boards in the unincorporated areas? And the second question is, what is the board nomination process? Will they be elected? Will they be appointed? What is that?
Thank you.
Felicia, I can start. Yeah, thanks. Okay, I'll start. The prior mention, I believe it was Lizzie from Forestville, on the, it wasn't really a question, it was the idea of $125 million not being a lot. You know, again, it's just a 1 point in a large range, but I did want to lift up a prior comment from the supervisor, which a lot of the goal of these districts is to amplify the funding and utilize it for things like matches for yet other money. We're seeing more and more so at state and federal levels. Grants, which are always good to go after no matter what, but grants actually prioritizing applications from cities and counties that do creative things like this. And in the state of California, we're seeing more explicit, higher ranking of proposals, where we see things like in HCD, Housing and Community Development Department, they explicitly list EIFDs, Enhanced Infrastructure Financing Districts, as ways to get more points on housing-oriented grants. So the dollars themselves are important, but they should also be looked at as a match for other funding. The very important points that also just mentioned just now, interacting with established unincorporated entities. We'll just give some examples. I wouldn't be surprised the supervisor's office has given more thought to this as well. We often see the ability to appoint public membership by someone like the county as an opportunity to utilize existing infrastructure. It could be a MAC representative, as an example, who represents the public membership on the Public Financing Authority board. Again, it's not a requirement, but it's certainly allowed. We have seen that sort of thing in the past as one way. All of the meetings of a Public Financing Authority are Brown Act public meetings. There's always this ability for MAC to have formal or informal involvement in any such public meetings of that Public Financing Authority board. Those are just some examples of the way that this entity could utilize existing infrastructure.
I think I saw a hand up back here.
Yes.
And then we'll go over here next. Okay, thank you.
Hi there, good evening. My name is Conan Valencia. I'm from Guerneville, and I'm here to represent 75 people in my neighborhood. And I'm here to speak on the challenges that we face with Fife Creek. The past 2 years, we've flooded roughly 6 times with no more than 5 feet of water. And I know that dredging occurs further upstream, which is causing challenges for our neighborhood. So I would like to have that possibly added to the list, specifically to a dredge proposal for Fife Creek. Thank you. Thank you.
Did we even answer the question about how one gets to be a member of the board?
He did.
What did you say?
They could be appointed.
Okay.
They could be appointed. It could be someone from a MAC, any county in the city of Michigan. That's not the only.
I'm James Williams from Forestville. I'm here representing the Forestville Skate Spot, which is an effort to establish a skate park in Forestville. That was one item that I'd love to see added to the list, along with improvement to sidewalks and bike lane, as has been previously mentioned. And I just wanted to understand if something like that could be eligible, because first item I see is Parks and Rec improvements, but as an unincorporated area, we don't have a Parks and Rec department. We just want to make sure that a project like ours could be supported in this way. Thanks.
Yes, we've seen that deemed eligible by legal counsel for other EIFDs.
Lloyd?
My name is Lloyd Guccione. And I have spent some time involved in my community, and I followed redevelopment on the Russian River and participated in it. I want you to know that, so that my comments, you might take with little weight. This meeting, both for the members of the public here and of course, the MAC, is part of a process to get buy-in. Get you committed by asking you, what do you want? By getting you excited to ask questions, to think through, to commit yourself to something. That is part of the selling of this concept, another redevelopment. I didn't come here asking for lollipops or ice cream or any of my wants. There are agencies and departments that should be doing their job, should be budgeting carefully. And if there's a culvert from the days of FDR that needs fixing, I think we need to talk to the director of that department sternly. And further, that is how we should take care of ourselves, through our existing departments and agencies. We don't need to create another bureaucracy. If any of you follow Russian River redevelopment or the spring in Sonoma, you know the issues and the divisiveness that those projects cause. Let me give you an example.
Thanks, Lloyd. Your time's up, sorry.
Let me give you an example, please.
Lloyd, everyone's giving.
I'm going to give one example and you please will accept it because you would appreciate it the most. An example of what can be done. Restroom. Guerneville has a public restroom and it costs $340,000 back into the 2000s and was done partly with jail labor. Be careful what you buy into.
Thanks.
Yes, and you know, you're always cutting me off. It's very kind of you.
I'm just doing
You're
the time.
doing your job.
And go ahead.
Hi, I'm Matt, also from Grayton. I'm just learning about EIFDs for the first time, and I'm curious. I think this notion of what goes into the county general fund versus something that's essentially apportioned to a smaller board to decide is interesting. And my understanding, just reading about it during this meeting, is that sometimes it's used to kind of accelerate the delivery of the funds so that, you know, we have this anticipated pot of funds and then maybe we sell a bond against this so that we could finance bigger chunks now. And I was just wondering if that was part of our county's conversation with this. Is that part of the intent, or is really the intent here that we're just saying, okay, this portion every year, a few $1 million every year, perhaps it's going to be used specifically for community infrastructure. And then also, I wasn't really clear if Jennifer's question was answered about, is there just an appointment process or is there a nomination process for these seats in addition to how it would interface with the CSPs? Thank you.
Great, thank you. I don't know, who's best to answer? Joe?
Sure, Felicia, you want to start on this one? Sure. Okay, so the bonding one, no determination has been made on whether this or these EIFDs would be utilized to issue debt to accelerate funding. But we do see that for most of the EIFDs formed that do take advantage of the ability to issue bonds to accelerate the ability to invest. We expect most EIFDs will do that, though they are not required to do that. Apologies for missing the nomination question. For the initial appointment to the PFA board, the only requirement is that the full city council has to approve the public members appointed by the city, and the county board of supervisors has to approve the public members appointed by the county. It's the initial appointment. Future vacancies of such members are required to go through this MADI Act provision that Felicia outlined briefly earlier. There's a provision that says if you have a vacancy on a board, you've got to publish a public notice that says, here's a vacancy, this is the entity, these are the roles and responsibilities. All those interested should submit applications. And then, though not required, we sometimes see a public interview process and then a choice made among applicants. That's for the filling of vacancies. For the initial appointments, while I said it's not required to do that full MADI Act public process, we have seen some of these EIFDs, public financing authorities, to choose to do that public process anyway, that MADI Act process, announcing vacancies, potentially holding interviews. It's an option, not a requirement.
Anyone else here? Because we're gonna go to online. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry. Okay.
Standing in front of a microphone is not my favorite thing.
Pretend it's not there.
My name is Dick Ogg, and I am a commercial fisherman from Bodega and have fished in this area for a long time. I mean, all of these things are things that are important to everybody. I see, I sincerely understand it. But one of the things I'd like to bring up is I'd like to talk about that ice house because it's so critical to the area of Bodega. Our identity and our lifestyle is based around the ability to provide a resource to you. And to do it adequately is really important. And that ice house makes all the difference in the world to all of us. So just, I know that there are so many other priorities, but I really feel it's important to sit back and understand that, we're here to provide that product to you in a sustainable way. And I just hope that we have the opportunity to be able to continue to do that and support the, the public and our community. So that's all I wanted to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We're gonna go on online. Sorry. Because we did count. Online?
Yes. So if you are attending online and you'd like to make public comment, please raise your hand and we will bring you into the room. Shad, you can unmute yourself for your public comment.
Hi, did you call on Chad?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hi. I just have a quick question I'm hoping to get a little bit of clarification. My name is Chad Davison. I manage 2 independent special districts that are both located within unincorporated Sonoma County. Being independent special districts, we collect a fee for the services that we provide, and we own our infrastructure, water, sewer, and park infrastructure. And I guess the question that I have is that would projects for infrastructure owned and operated by these two independent special districts be qualifying for the financing because of the fact that the financing is based on leveraging future property tax, which is not the source of revenue that is used to fund the services that we provide.
Legally, yes.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you.
We got it.
Next, we have Carrie. You can unmute yourself.
Hi there, thank you. This is Carrie Hernandez of Forestville. And adding to that list, I'd love to advocate for the expansion of our Forestville Public Library. I saw Sebastopol on there. And I think that expanding Forestville would really help to serve our community. In addition, I'd like to discuss if there's a chance adding a public swimming pool. We have EIFDs in Sebastopol, but if we put one in Forestville or the lower Russian River area, it would actually help with a conversation in a past meeting about water safety for the youth. We could provide more services like that of swim lessons, et cetera, as well as really improving with a public kind of community service. I'd also love to have on there public transportation expansion, but really accessibility to that and really improve our walkability and help remove our reliance on vehicles. I know we're very rural here, so I'd love to know if there's some creative ways that we might have an infrastructure that would support that. And then of course, for everyone's safety, well-being and property value, wildfire prevention is huge for me. And I'd love to make sure that that is on the list. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Next is Brian, if you could please unmute yourself.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. My name is Brian Grant, and I am a resident of Monterey. And I would like to start off by thanking Supervisor Hopkins and Joe for reminding everyone about the importance of seed money for expanding funding for projects in the Lower River area and in all of West County. It's very difficult. We do a lot of work with the special districts, and a lot of them are budget strapped, and finding funding that can act as seed money for access to future funds is often very difficult. When redevelopment was in place, it was a much easier scenario. So as a question to that regarding the redevelopment conversation, Joe had mentioned the fact that everyone had mentioned the fact that there's not an increase to individual taxpayers. But Joe had mentioned the idea that there was a reappropriation kind of behind the scenes associated with tax dollars. And with redevelopment, we saw a scenario where the special taxing entities, specifically the fire districts, the park districts, water district, that sort of thing, did see an impact on their overall budget based on the fact that the portions of the tax revenue were not coming their way. Is this a similar scenario, or what is the criteria by which the funding comes in? And I'll take my answer off. Thank you so much.
I can start. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, thanks. Probably one of the most important differences between these financing districts and redevelopment agencies is that we cannot change the revenue structure of any taxing entity that does not voluntarily agree to allocate some of its revenue. So if the city and the county were to go down this path, they can only affect their share of the future property tax dollars. This cannot affect school districts, fire districts, mosquito abatement districts, water districts, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very important difference. The plus side is we're not messing things up for them. But just to give the full picture here, the downside is these do tend to be financially less robust tools. You get less of the dollar available. And so they aren't not as financially robust as the redevelopment agencies were. Thank you for the question.
I would just add to that school districts are prohibited from being involved in EIFDs because of the issues with redevelopment. But some other districts like city down here, Rancho Cucamonga, did include its fire district in the EIFD. So other taxing entities can voluntarily join.
Yeah.
Chuck, you are next. Unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks. Chuck Ramsey from Monterey. I have 3 questions. Some of it's just not understanding, I think. I don't know if there are 2 separate districts, one for Sebastopol and one for West County, or if it's going to be one district. And if that's the case, why wasn't it broken out into 2 districts? Someone had brought up earlier representation. I know Sebastopol is having financial issues. So it seems like it would be more equitable if they were broken out separately. Second question, someone had brought up roads, and since it's repairing or repaving, not new roads, I guess roads would not be eligible. And my question is, since roads is not eligible, if this district process goes through, it seems like there would be less money going into the general fund to pay for roads, which would be a major problem. Third, Brian had brought up, I guess, Park and Rec and fire departments getting less of the new tax money going in. And I know that you had mentioned that a little bit. And I think that was a problem. The fire department kept saying, oh, redevelopment's taking away our taxes. So I don't know if that's actually going to be a case or not. Brian had also mentioned as far as them getting less money, but in the case of Monterey and with Brian's company, Monterey did very well in redevelopment, especially the park district. They got a new skateboard park, and they also got the community center remodeled. So even if they were getting less tax dollars, they certainly got a big bang for their buck. So thank you, and appreciate the clarification.
Thanks, Doug. You were right on time.
Yeah.
So they can get 3 questions. Joe, are you gonna?
I can start. Sure. Okay, separate districts. So it's not been determined yet whether we're talking about a single EIFD or multiple EIFDs. It could work, I guess, 2 primary ways. First, if the following assumes that both the city and the county want to participate in this financing district concept. One option is a single financing district with 2 what are called project areas that would allow the accounting to be at least done separately for the city portion and the unincorporated portion. That's one option. I'll give the other option and just talk a little bit about pros and cons. The other option is 2 completely separate districts, one by the city for the city jurisdiction and one by the county for the unincorporated jurisdiction. The single financing district with 2 project area approach, the advantages are administration, just efficiencies, cost efficiencies, economies of scale. The idea that you're only staffing one new entity, preparing one infrastructure financing plan, convening meetings for one board. There are annual reports for these, only preparing, one annual report versus 2. So I'll call all that administration efficiency. A downside of the single approach, you can if you're taking the perspective of, let's say, an unincorporated county person, you might think, I don't want any city council. I want minimum city council representation on an EIFD that governs my area. I want only county representation on the financing district board that governs my area. So it is this question of representation that could be perceived as a potential downside for having a single district with multiple project areas. The downsides are probably now apparent of having multiple districts. It may just be, more admin, having more meetings, more documentation, in essence, duplicated. we haven't reached this conclusion, but maybe it's a city staff and county staff comment on whether either of those agencies can fully staff this completely on their own. It may be the case or may not be. We've not made that determination. So those are just different pros and cons, but the short answer is that's not yet been determined. Are we talking about one EIFD or two EIFDs? Roads and repairing and repaving. So what's eligible per the law is either brand new or significant rehab of roadways. So if we're filling potholes, if we're doing sort of spot check repaving, those are not really what are eligible in the EIFD statute. It is really brand new or substantial rehabilitation as far as what's eligible. So I want to clarify that point. And perhaps as it relates to the Parks and Rec and Fire District, yeah, we also acknowledged there was an issue. There were issues with former redevelopment agencies reducing revenues for other special purpose taxing entities like Parks and Rec districts and fire districts. That's not really the case today. If they're going to be affected, they have to voluntarily approve resolutions, allocating a share of their future property tax. If they don't voluntarily do so, they're out. They're out unless they want in.
And I just wanted to add on the roads piece, because I think that Chuck, maybe you were also getting at, if we potentially starve the general fund, will we then have fewer roads repaved in West County and really countywide? To which I'd answer a couple of things. Number one, again, we're looking at something that will, through these investments, actually ultimately keep the general fund whole by, sort of supporting increase in property values. But number two, technically the Board of Supervisors can reduce the general fund allocation to the roads budget at any time. But for as long as I have been on the board, we have actually increased it, and actually even just in like last year or the year before, increased the CPI adjustment to keep up with inflation. Because as my colleague David likes to say, no one ever didn't get reelected by paving roads. And so I would just say that you all are the way of keeping the Board of Supervisors honest and ensuring that we don't backslide, which is just showing up at meetings. Really, truly, when the county started investing general fund dollars in roads was a direct result of the public coming unglued, because the Board of Supervisors says, hey, we're gonna let a whole bunch of roads go to gravel, including the road that I used to farm on, by the way. I was one of those people also coming unglued. They formed SOS Roads, Save Our Sonoma County Roads, and the Board of Supervisors responded. So I think that political pressure will hopefully keep that general fund chugging. And I know we still don't have enough money, but we at least are getting there gradually over time, investing.
So we need to yell even more.
Please come yell at me. That's what I'm saying.
All right. Is it Jenny next?
It's Ginny is next. Unmute you, Ginny. Now you can unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. I want to thank everybody for holding this meeting this evening. This has been very informative. I'm on the CMAC, in the Coastal CMAC, and we're very interested in how this will work, how it will function. And of course, there are many worthy projects that need attention in our area. And it's good to know that there's a lot of thought going into how to go about funding these things. My first question is how, when this board gets formulated, how will they come to a sort of a prioritization scheme for how they select the projects that they move on first? Is it going to be by popular appeal, popular decree? How will, because we need so many things that we're starting at a point where there's going to be a lot of contention for those resources. So any light you can shed on how that might come about will probably help the public understand better, how this is really going to work. So the criteria, not only the projects to be, but the criteria for, we only have so much money, how are we going to allocate that for this project? And then my other question has to do with, how are the vendors or the contractors that are going to implement the project, how will they be selected? Is that a typical process we have already in place, that those companies will be selected based on their bids? Or will the criteria be that that company is also within the county? Or how does that work? Thank you.
Felicia, should I start on this one?
Yeah, go for it. And then,
Or do you wanna-
then I think that just the second part of the question is it would go through the city or county bidding process.
Yeah. So, when the board gets formulated, how will the board come to a prioritization scheme? So a few notes. In some of these that we have formed, we've written out as soon as the district was formed in its governing infrastructure financing plan. So the following metrics will be utilized on an ongoing basis for allocation to projects as the dollars roll in, just to try to establish a framework at the time of formation that will be applied. A very important note we have to make is a matter of expectation setting is when you form these districts, it's a bit of a quiet start. You form these and you have just established your baseline for assessed value growth, and the value actually needs to grow above that baseline before there are any dollars to spend. The reality is that for many of these, once they form, you'll see small amounts of dollars, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands in the first 1, 2, 3 years, and it may be 4 or 5 years out before you have any dollars to fund material projects or any dollars to do something like a bond issuance. So it's very important as a matter of expectation setting, and it also just informs the process and how much pressure there is to nail it, to get it 100% right at the time of formation. We try to encourage our public agencies to be somewhat foresightful and flexible at the time of formation, because we don't know now what will happen next year. We don't know what will happen in 5 years, bring it 50 years down the line. So the best we could try to do is maybe lay out that prioritization framework, and as the time goes by and the dollars build in the account and there are actual funding to be allocated, it is this public entity, this public financing authority, whose job it is through its public meeting process, Brown Act public meeting process, to decide how to allocate those dollars. That's one of the main purposes of that board is to facilitate that decision making. The vendor, yeah, Felicia covered the vendor question. Typically, these will be infrastructure projects that are ultimately owned by a city or a county, and they will be subject to the standard city or county public bidding process for those types of improvements.
Okay, we have one more question from George.
George, you can unmute yourself now.
Good evening. I'm George Flores from Bodega Bay. I have a PowerPoint. I don't know if you can give me screen share, but if not, I'll just describe it to you. Last week here in Bodega Bay, we held a health and safety fair that was attended by folks from Bodega Bay, Bodega, and Valley Ford, and a few other places in our area as well. And we did a survey of those participants. Over 100 people were in attendance. And one of the answers to the survey had much to do with projects that could be considered under the EIFD criteria, as you've been describing them. And these were very popular. I'm going to read you a brief list. We have many Latino families attended, seniors, and like I said, people from the different geographic areas, and highly represented in the answers of what they felt would help to improve their health and well-being in terms of a project or walking and biking paths, sports fields and courts, of which there are no public sports fields and courts in the areas that I mentioned. Gym, a big gymnasium with equipment for exercise. Again, our weather would speak to the need for an indoor gymnasium, and we don't have one. A swimming pool that's been mentioned before. Seniors and a recreation center, social center for seniors, and a community kitchen, both of which could be perhaps housed at the Grange, but would need outfitting for that. So these are, I think, projects that I'd like you to add to the list, if you would, as we consider them, because these are of interest, of great interest to the people in our area.
Thank you, George. I want to thank both Joe and Felicia it was really an informative session, and thank you for answering our questions. I'm sure we're gonna come up with many more questions in the next few weeks even. I can think of like 10. So thank you very much.
You can go home then. Thank you.
With that,
Thank you.
the meeting is adjourned.